Chavra, tonight is not just our weekly Monday night halacha chabura. It is also Yud Kislev, which is the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus. That's so let's we'll explain a little bit what that means in a moment. Yeah. Yeah. But you can catch it up. It's big Farbrengen tonight and a big Farbrengen tomorrow. That's it's lots of. There's a lot of things to Farbrengen.
It's a separate WhatsApp group, right?
It is a yeah.
So you created a separate WhatsApp group. There's probably a join link somewhere in the main device.
I'll send you the link if you want.
And he just does like a daily
5 minutes. It's the 5 minutes between Mincha Maariv. Yeah.
I don't think y'all blame me for having muted chats pretty much.
Yeah, there's good reason to mute chats, but there's way too many chats in the world. Otherwise, you're going to have to listen to all of them, and that's bad for the Jewish people. Okay, Chevra. Tonight is Yotas Kislev. It is the day that the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, got out of prison, which spearheaded the spreading of Hasidus all throughout Europe and all throughout the world. It is also the yahrzeit of the Maggid of Mezrich, of Dov Ber of Mezrich, who was the primary leader of Hasidus after the passing of the Baal Shem HaKadosh. Tonight, in particular, this is the 250th yahrzeit of the Maggid of Mezrich. So we're going to do something interesting tonight. We're going to go on a little bit of a journey here. And it's a Levitic journey. So hold on to your hats, because what we're going to do is we are going to review and then learn a halacha in Hilchos Kashrus, in the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch. And then we're going to discuss just a little bit how this connects to worlds way above that. So we're gonna go on a little bit of a journey here. We're gonna learn the halacha, and then we're gonna jump like maybe not 30,000 feet, but like just a few. So if you take a look in the in our packets with the tour here, so we have been speaking about the halachos of bittul, how a substance can become batel in another substance, and we've discussed that you can test for that bittul by either having a non-Jew taste it, right? That was called te'imas kfela, have a non-Jew taste it. Or alternatively, it could be batel in how much? Shishim, right? 61, 60th. We mentioned last time, I think, that there is a halacha. We saw that the Ramban 3 weeks ago, that the Ramban had spliced this quite succinctly, that there is something called the substance itself, and then you also have the flavor of that substance. And sometimes what you are attempting to do is to be mevatel the thing itself, and sometimes what you are trying to do is to be mevatel the flavor of the thing. So we pointed out that this differs whether you are talking about yavish beyavish or lach balach, meaning dry substances with dry substances, and liquid substances or flavor mixing substances with other flavor mixing substances. We pointed out that la halacha, if you would have 2 pieces of kosher meat and 1 piece of treif meat, and you could not tell the difference between those things, then at the very least you could eat one of them, maybe 2, maybe even 3, maybe even all 3 at the same time, right? Because there is a principle of bittul berov, which means nullified in the majority, right? Mm-hmm. Meaning 2 against 1 is a majority rules, right? Majority rules. Okay. So far, these are halachas that we have covered. We also pointed out that if it is mixed in, if you have a piece of meat that is that's not kosher, that mixes in, that falls in to your chicken soup, right? And it sits there, stews there, it's cooking there for a while, right? So now you need to do 2 things. If you can see the piece of meat, what do you need to do? Fish it out, right? Because that thing itself you can't eat. That's treif. That's not kosher, right? Could be treifa, could be tamea, could be nevela, it could be any of those things that would be problematic. But you also then need 60 against against
One.
the flavor
Yeah.
of that thing, right? Because it's been sitting there, it's been cooking in there. Now, the question that we're going to discuss this evening, and then we're going to jump a little bit, is once you fish the thing out, you need 60 against how much? One of what?
I think it's 1/60th.
Of what?
Meaning the item, the ta'ama or whatever is the 260 of the whole container.
Right, but
But if it's a
Maybe
flavor,
what are you trying to get rid of here?
yeah, flavor.
The flavor.
Yeah. Okay.
How do you measure flavor? Meaning, if you were to tell me that I had, I don't know, chazer schmaltz, like pig fat, right? And that liquefied and has mixed into the whole thing. So, and I had 1 ounce of pig fat, and I have 60 ounces of chicken soup, right? So I could say that, okay, 1/60. But if I have a piece of meat, I know how big the piece of meat is, but I don't know how much of that flavor has been imparted. How do I know that?
I think we gave the example of a ghost pepper or something. It doesn't have to be 160. You'll still taste that.
Right.
ghost
So
pepper.
if you can taste it, then 60th isn't going to help.
So then, really, the 1/60th also is a matter of flavor.
So it's for sure a matter of flavor, right?
How do you quantify
But how do you, meaning you don't know, like, meaning how much of the flavor of the piece of meat is now in the soup? You hear the question? Like I have an ounce of meat and 50 ounces of chicken soup. So were it to be that I had an ounce of like flavor that went in, so that would not be batel, right?
Right.
But I don't know how much of the flavor that piece of meat is now in my chicken soup. I don't know. So that is the question that the Torah is going to address in Halacha Gimel. And that you are going to find on page Reish Nun, which looks like this. This is page Reish Nun over here. We're going to take a look in the middle. Sorry, it's Halacha Gimel. Sorry, no, I lied. Halacha. Halacha Dalet. Sorry. Yeah, the next page over. Reish Nun Aleph. So at the top of the page, you'll see V'lo Mibaya. Reish Nun Aleph. So the Torah says like this. The Torah tells us, "V'lo mibaya isur shenis'arif beheter v'nimuach b'tocha shetzarach shishim levatla." Obviously, if you have an isur, something forbidden, shenis'arif beheter, that's mixed into permissible, right? V'nimuach b'tocha, and then melted into it, right? You had a block of fat, right? So I don't know if that is a hechsher. But when I googled it, it said it's kosher, so I'm not sure.
Oh, good. That's the standard.
That's right. The other one, I didn't realize that there were two different kinds. Right. So if you Google, see if you can do a little more research. The other bag is over here of the regular ones. I picked up 2 bags and I didn't realize they were different. Right, but it's the same flavor. It's just a different texture. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Give it to the Jewish
Right.
students in the neighborhood, and if they can tell the difference.
Right. This is the Stacy's Thins. I didn't realize. That was the first bag I opened. I was like, I don't know what that is. Right. Yeah.
When we say 1 to 60, is it volume or is it mass?
We'll assume volume because we're talking about liquids.
I know. I was just curious because
Yeah.
if you have something very dense,
Yeah.
right? Because the problem with ounces is, are we talking about volumes or mass?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So let's say fluid ounces, right, or milliliters, because makes sense.
Now,
That's,
here's my objection to metric. It's inhuman. What's nice about the imperial system is it's all on human scale. So all our measurements are intuitive to like human body parts, which is why it was developed.
To one particular human's body parts. King Henry's
human
foot,
beings
or I don't know
operate
what
in
that
similar
is.
scales, like inches
Yeah.
are an intuitive measure. So I stand by this. Whereas metric is a French revolutionary, godless, atheist, rationalist imposition, and that's
Hello.
why no one thinks in it intuitively. You need to be some kind of broken, degenerate continental to.
You should know, by the way, fun fact: the metric system is now like standardized based on like the decay of I think a cesium atom, like right,
Yeah.
and get this, the imperial system is now based on the metric system for standard measurements.
It's like the dollar being the reserve currency.
Yeah, it's
Can't get away
it's
from
legitimate. Okay, so says the tour like this. He says, obviously, if you have chazer schmaltz that melts into your chicken soup, so you can measure liquid to liquid. That's easy to figure out, right? I mean, in theory, you would need 60 times chicken soup to be mavatel, to nullify the presence of the pig fat. He says, "Ella afilu mekirai v'hu shalim." But what happens if you didn't have chazer schmaltz? What you had was a piece of chazer, right? A piece of pig that dropped into your chicken soup, and you can see it. And you go, no, don't put that in. That's the other one, right? Take that out, right? Take out the chazer. So you pulled it out, right? V'hu shalim, and it's a whole piece. It went in a whole piece, and you pulled out a whole piece. Bizarre, you threw it away. Says the Torah, Tzarech Shishim Keneged Kol HaIsur. We now establish that you need 60 times the volume of the whole piece.
That's the most conservative.
Right. The most conservative amount that you could. We know that it's not the whole thing, but the only value that you can intelligently measure against is the volume of the thing.
This is why you have to cook in a beaker. That way,
Right.
Right. Displacement causes it to go. What's the name of the ancient Greek who sat in the bathtub? You said
Archimedes.
Was it
Yeah,
Archimedes?
yeah.
Archimedes. Yeah.
Right.
The Archimedes principle. That's why you
Right.
cook in a beaker.
Cook in a beaker, right?
Yeah.
That's
A graduated cylinder cauldron to make your public soup, and the goyim try and spike it with pig parts.
right. That's the only people that have beakers large enough to be cooking in, I think, are cooking crystal meth. But
Yeah.
you know, it's-
Walter White is my much
right, this is a mashgiach.
But what
Yeah,
if-
yeah,
What if?
for sure, Jewish, right?
This
Right.
sounds
Right.
this sounds like like this scenario is in a vacuum, right? And you have a liquid vat,
Right.
liquid, and the piece of chazer, whatever falls in there. Displacement aside, now you're worried about liquid to liquid ratio.
Right.
What if this is something closer to chilling, where you have liquid, but you also have your kosher solids?
Right. So
And
you'd
you
have
have-
to figure out like what the majority of this thing is. Now, if it wasn't submerged
You
in the
have
liquid,
50%
for example,
liquid and 50% of your own solid meat.
right?
Another solid piece like the same size as all the others, and you're like, is it the 50% liquid that's the 60, or is it the whole
Right. So
with my solid?
yeah. So
that is the 60?
we'll talk about whether the whole thing is submerged. Meaning, if it's not actually submerged, if it's submerged in liquid, the whole thing is submerged, even if there's pieces
You're
in
not making
it.
show it right. If it's
Right.
liquid and solid, it's got to be mixed.
No, but I'm saying like how. Yeah.
Just fell on the surface. And
Right. What if it didn't fall on the surface? So the piece that's submerged, you should assume then, however much is submerged, that volume you can assume has dissipated taste to the entirety of the thing. But we're going to talk about partial dispersion of flavor in a second, because that's the next piece that the Torah mentions. Because this has a massive ramification and implication to the kashrus of pots and pans. How so? Says the Torah, second line from the bottom of this paragraph here. Bottom line. Sorry. Lefichach. Therefore, hamavashal b'kederas isur. If you cooked your cholent in a treif pot, right? The pot was treif. You didn't realize, right? The pot was treif. You cooked your cholent in a treif pot. Shehi bas yoma, which has been recently used. Even if you can't see any dirt in the inside of it, it was, washed out, rinsed out, but it was recently used. It says, or alternatively, tochev kaf shel isur beheter. You put a spoon from treif stew into your cholent. You put that beheter, v'chihai gav, anything like that, right? But basa b'chalav, a milchik thing into a fleishik thing, or a fleishik thing into a milchik thing. He says tzorech shishim neged kol hakadera. What you need is to measure against the volume of the entirety of the pot. Why? Because if you cook something in a pot, and then you dump that stuff out and put something else in the pot, how much flavor of the original thing was absorbed into the pot and now is re-expressed into your new stew?
This always goes back to the thing that you left off at the show that I was in, where it depends what you cooked in that pot. Like if it was something garlicky or oniony.
Oh, so no. So that's gonna be relevant. That's gonna be relevant to the ability of the flavor to be reawakened. We'll get there in a little bit. But how much flavor is absorbed into a pot?
See, I really don't think a lot.
If it's the same
So-
thing as barely anything.
So the answer is we have no idea.
Unless you taste it.
What meaning in theory, if you would taste it, yes, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't we,
But if it's the same thing, just not kosher, you won't tell the difference.
Right.
couldn't we have an
Right.
idea if we just kind of boiled some water in it and then drink that broth? If it tastes like anything other than heated water, we
Right.
would know.
So-
oh, that's how much flavor.
So the answer is, and we'll talk about our pots and pans today in a moment, but the answer is that fundamentally we have no idea. Now, let's point out, by the way, that the concept of clean pots, pans, and utensils is very recent.
Because you couldn't waste water.
One, you couldn't waste water, and two, they didn't have detergent.
Mhm.
Right? Those two things are new, right? I mean, even if you could waste water, you certainly weren't wasting hot water, and water hot enough to like wash something. So the most that you would do would be like clean out your pot, like wipe it down with like leaves, right? So even if you couldn't see something, there was always like residue of something. Think, for example, wooden spoons, right? How much flavor is absorbed into a wooden spoon? Probably a lot, right? Probably a lot of flavor is absorbed into a wooden spoon. How much of that flavor is then re-emitted afterwards?
Not over much.
Yeah, you have no idea, but probably less. Probably less, but you don't know, right? Says the Torah, standard definition of bittul is 60 against whatever solid item is put in there. Why? Because that way you know you're safe. It could be less. It likely is less. But being that we have no way of verifying what the less than that is, shishim against the volume of that item is what we're measuring. Right?
Let's say you cooked in a 1 liter, whatever, jar, whatever it is. So then you would need 60. So if you were to use that same vessel, it would have to be a 60th.
A 60th against that vessel,
Right.
right? Against like, meaning what's the volume of that vessel?
Right. So basically makes it impossible to use.
Well, no, not necessarily. It depends how big
Well,
the pot
I mean,
is.
If you made a big cholent,
Right.
you're not going to have a pot that's 60 times your cholent.
No. Meaning it would need to be, if you have a cholent, right? And you accidentally made it with treif meat, right?
Yeah.
And now you want to make another cholent in there, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, I just realized this kli is treif. This kli is treif. Is my food treif?
So it had to be the piece of treif meat was a 60th or smaller compared to the volume of the pot itself.
Meaning the pot is treif. We're assuming that the treif flavor has now made everything there treif. It was a pot filled with treif meat, right? And that flavor has now dissipated and made everything that was in the pot treif. So now that flavor has been absorbed into the walls of your pot. And now you cook something kosher in that pot. Is that kosher food now treif? It depends. Is the volume of the food inside the pot 60 times larger than the volume of the pot?
Oh.
Not the volume of the inside of the pot. The volume of the walls of the pot.
Ah, now I see.
Because what's treif here?
The
So
coating.
that comes back
The
to
pot.
Literally,
the sherry cask.
Correct.
Comes back to the sherry cask situation.
Right. It's the volume of the thickness of the walls of the barrel.
Wow.
Right?
Whoa.
That's what we're measuring against.
So don't use cast iron. Use the flimsiest.
But if you
crappest
have-
aluminum.
Yeah, but-
Correct. If you have garbage aluminum that's like this thin,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's a very large pot, you might well end up with 60 times more
Yeah.
liquid in your pot.
Duct tape
Then-
and
That's what you
weld
meant by
together
volume
old soda
of
cans and
the
make a pot.
vessel.
Right. That's the volume of the vessel because that's the thing that's treif.
But why does that make sense? Nobody's cooking on the outside.
But we assume because
Yeah,
we
but-
don't know
Think about
how
the
far
old-
did the flavor
Think
go.
about a
Barrel,
wooden-
I
a
understand.
big wooden
Barrels all
pot.
around.
Think about a big wooden pot, like the old days thing, and it's.
I'm thinking of cauldron, like a witch's
Right.
cauldron.
Whatever
Big
it is,
cauldron.
they're saying
But
it's
How
still
much
don't
flavor
know-
has
we
been
don't know
absorbed
how
into
far
it?
seep
And it
through the
creates
whole
into
thing.
it.
That's
So
what-
we have to
that's
assume
what
it's
I'm saying.
all of that. In the same way that we go 60 because we assume, well, that's a safe number. Or when we have to be conservative about the chunk of pig that falls in, we assume it's the full volume of the
We
pig that
assume
got left behind, basically.
that the
So we assume that the
Patron
cauldron
takes over.
is
all
entirely
of this.
co-opted.
Right.
So what is the comparison? 60 against what? What is it?
The
So 60
circumference
against
of
the-
the vessel.
of
So-
this.
Is there 60 times more liquid inside than volume of the, meaning if you were to put this into
I compact.
Roth's beaker and see the
Yeah.
displacement, right? What's the displacement of this cup?
And it has to be 60 times more than whatever's inside.
Meaning, no, what's inside has to be 60 times more than this.
How's that possible?
It depends.
It would not fit.
No. The volume of this, just the material,
The thing.
the material.
I'm gonna just get a cup and
So that
do
would
the
be-
displacement.
Right, go for it.
If you
That's-
think about a smaller vessel,
No, I was actually really drinking.
what you would need
There you
a
go.
bigger percentage. But we know what that mathematical equation
I
is.
think
Right.
I get it.
So
I'm
we just
curious
gotta
to see
plug
what
it
it's
in.
gonna do. I think
Right.
I got it. Yeah. 'Cause
I'm
like,
curious to see what
that's what you meant by a really, really thin pan,
Right.
like aluminum. Yeah.
So
Because you could hold a lot of liquid in.
Nowadays,
so let's imagine that this
Charles
is
good.
right.
You have to have this in this
Right.
video.
So yeah, it's true. Yeah. Right, come over. Yeah, we're good. Yeah, so like, what we're gonna do is let's imagine that this is your pot, right?
Yeah.
Pot meaning the thing that you cook in, not the other kind. This is your pot, right? And you want to know what is the volume of the liquid inside versus the volume of the actual material. So you would submerge that, right? Submerge that entirely. You would measure the difference between them, right? And then you would measure the volume of the liquid that you have
In the
that fills it up.
In the
Right? If there's 60 times more liquid inside, then displacement of the material that makes up, so then this pot in theory, would, assuming that you filled it all the way to the top every time, right? In theory, could not make the food inside not kosher. Because it would always be but now you shouldn't do that because in mevatlin Israel lechatchila, we don't intentionally nullify something not kosher. But if you did it accidentally, this would be kosher, right? If you're like, oh my gosh, Sam, don't cook in that pot is treif. Oh my gosh, you just made a giant cholent in the pot that was treif. Hey Blumenthal, what do I do about the situation? Oh no, don't worry, man. You've got 60 times more stuff than the thickness of your pot. You're okay.
Okay, now
Right?
I see the flow of thought because you introduced the solid piece in the liquid and that you have to measure compared to how much liquid can be contained within that solid
Right.
piece of meat. And this is just the reverse scenario where it's the actual container that is,
Correct.
is giving off
The flavor.
treif into the kosher liquid inside.
Right.
So as opposed to inside out, this is outside in.
Same thing. Of a
Okay,
solid
outside
piece.
has to be the 1/60th compared to the rest of it that's inside.
Correct.
So if your vessel is like really long and really thin, for example, I don't know why you have that, but like a vase,
Beaker?
you know?
Right. A test tube to
So
go with the
very-
beaker.
Yeah, it's like very good chance it would be treif and something you can do about it.
Yeah, you
Right.
really got to pay attention to the square cube law.
Right? That's it. That's what you're doing here.
On pots and vessels.
Right.
Yeah,
So the tour.
Unironically, I think that's a good idea.
Right. That's what the volumetric measurement is.
Yeah. Elephants can't get past a 4-foot trench for the same reason I want a big wide pot.
There you go.
Because of the way their bodies are structured, they weigh so much relative to the ability of their bones to support it. I mean, if they have like a 4-foot drop, it will shatter their bones. Whereas, like, if you drop a mouse from like 6 feet up, a mouse can largely survive because its mass is so small. That's one of the reasons why little kids can like take falls a lot better than a fully grown man.
I thought it was because they're made out of rubber.
Because they weigh
Kids
so
bounce.
little that it like just doesn't affect their bones in the same way that a larger thing.
It's those videos of like people like throwing squirrels off buildings and they just scamper away.
I have never seen a video of someone throwing a squirrel at a building. But
Don't Google it.
I'm
It's not good.
I still don't watch it.
Yeah. Says the Torah as follows. It says, "Keneged kol ma shetachal me'akaf." The same thing is true if you stick a treif spoon in your pot, right? You'd have to measure against the whole part of the spoon. Now, he says, "She'ein ani yodim kama bla'ai." We don't know how much was absorbed into that spoon. We have no idea. We know that treif was absorbed, but how much we don't know. He says, "Lo yishna hein shel cheres," and the material doesn't make a difference. He says, doesn't make a difference if it's made out of earthenware, if it's pottery, or eitz, or if it's made out of wood, or matachas, or metal. And then he quotes an interesting din. He says, "V'Rav Rabbeinu Peretz hichmir bekafshel matachas." Rabbeinu Peretz, one of the Balei Atosos, was machmir with a metal spoon. Lahatzich shishim keneged kula afilu loy hichnisu kula. Mishum decham miktzos cham kula. Says Rabbeinu Peretz was machmir that you have to measure against the entirety of the spoon if it's made out of metal, even the part that's sticking out of it.
Wow.
Why? Because metal heats up. If you have something metal that is in a source of heat, the bottom of it is, so the top of it's going to get hot as well. That's not true about wood. So he says, so maybe we have to be concerned that the flavor is going to travel with the heat, right? Now he quotes this chumrah, and then we'll talk about in Shulchan Aruch whether or not this chumrah of Rabbeinu Peretz is maintained, but meaning that we should assume Rabbeinu Peretz is saying we should assume that wherever heat transfer happens, flavor transfer happens.
But don't we know now that might not be accurate?
So a lot of this might not be accurate to our materials today.
That's what I mean.
Right.
Like somebody's fancy, whatever.
Right, meaning it's hard to make.
And
I'll give an
like
example
you
in a
said,
second.
Almost it could be flipped back. Like the wooden spoon now, I could make an argument that it should be the whole volume of the whole thing.
Right.
Oh, I was gonna say the pot too. What if you have a metal pot
Right.
and you've only
And you
filled
only-
up a
the
tenth
whole
of it?
way.
Right.
Is the whole pot considered
Maybe. Right. So he makes this claim. We'll get in a second. He says, "Umiu im bishul isur bekaderes heter." He says, however, if you cooked something forbidden, an isur bekaderes heter, in a kosher pot, right, in a pot of heter, right? He says, "Lo yamrin." We don't say shiguf hakadera titzarach levatel ha'isur. He says you don't say that the guf hakadera, that the entire volume of the kedera, of the kosher pot, needs to be mevatel the isur, that which is forbidden. He says the lahachmir amrinan hachi v'lo lahakel. We are saying this, that you have to measure against the entirety of the pot or the entirety of the spoon. That's a chumrah. It's a chumrah, meaning it's a stringency. When we say that you have to measure against the entire piece of treif meat, the volume of the entire piece of treif meat, or you have to measure against the entirety of the volume of the pot in order to see if it's 60 against, that is a stringency. That's not a halachic fact. Meaning, we're not going to be lenient in the same direction as well. We're not going to say that if I have a pot, let's say I have a pot with very thick walls, right? Very thick walls. And let's say my pot can fit I don't know, 20 fluid ounces, right? And 1 ounce of chazer schmelz falls in. So that's 20 to 1, right? But the volume of my very super duper thick pot is another 50 fluid ounces, right? So I can add 20 to 50 and say that's going to be mavatal, the whole thing. He says, no, you can't say that to be lenient. You can only say that to be strict, right? Meaning we're concerned potentially that flavor is dissipated throughout the thickness of the pot. That's not, we say that's what happened. It didn't definitely happen. So you can't say this is a halachic fact, that flavor dissipates throughout the whole thing. We are concerned that it might. So you can't say that to be lenient. We only say that to be strict. He says, you can only say that you're measuring the 1 ounce against the 20 ounces of liquid that's in the pot. Right? It's a stringent, it's a chumrah to say that we are going to measure against the whole thing. Okay. So far is the halacha. What we have said is that don't kill it in the hummus. That's, right? Otherwise, if you kill the bug in the hummus, you have to scoop out the bug from the hummus before eating the hummus.
Greater than 60.
No,
It's a pretty
what if
thin
the bug's
grader.
matched up by your act of killing it?
Right. Well,
And
then
it's
you
in
have
separate parts.
right. So
Then it's
then,
like I can eat the frozen broccoli. because
Correct.
of that. Yeah.
well, yeah, but only if you can't see the pieces of the bug.
Yes.
Right.
Well, I mean, there's a garnish on top.
Exactly. Okay. Now this is the yeah.
Did we ever mention, maybe you skipped a few steps because we went right to the interesting part, but did we ever discern why 160?
We're gonna talk.
Why not 170th?
Yeah, so-
50th?
We'll deal with that. We'll deal with that question. We'll deal with that question in halacha, meaning in
Something
the,
from the Beit HaMikdash?
one of the halachas of Beit HaMikdash. We'll get there. We'll deal with that more specifically next time. What I want to do just for a few minutes is to jump 10, 20, 30,000 feet. Take a copy of this for a second. We're going to learn a little bit of Chassidus. This comes from a phenomenal sefer called Likutei Halachos. Now, the Likutei Halachos is over here. Likutei Halachos, you'll see there's a big set there. Likutei Halachos was written by Rabbi Nosson of Nemirov. Rabbi Nosson Breslover was the primary Talmud of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who wrote a book called Likutei Halachos, where he goes through major topics in Shulchan Aruch, the halachas in Shulchan Aruch, like we're learning now, and discusses those halachas according to Chassidus and Kabbalah. So the underpinnings and the moral, ethical, spiritual ramifications and practical considerations emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually of these halachas. It's a phenomenal piece of work in general. Stylistically, he's wordy, so there's a lot to chew through to get to the pieces that he's saying. That's the style of writing. Nothing that he says is extraneous, but it is rather wordy in terms of reading. So I always recommend when people want to look at the halachas is to read a lot quickly and then go back and review. We're not going to look at a tremendous amount here, but what we are going to talk about is Hilchos Taroves, which is what we're learning here in the Torah and Shulchan Aruch. And what we are going to do is take a look on the second page here, which is page Shin Mem Aleph at Oz Beis over here. So that Oz Beis, bottom of the left-hand column, right? Key, right. So he says as follows. What we've pointed out is that there is something called Isur, something that's forbidden substance, and then there is the flavor of that forbidden substance, which is called Ta'am. And our concern in all of our kashrus questions is Ta'am Ki'ikar, is that the flavor of something that's forbidden is also forbidden, right? Ta'am Ki'ikar, if you have 1 ounce of flavor, that is 1 ounce of forbidden substance, right? Even if you pull that substance out, like what we just discussed.
Ikar being flavor.
Ikar being the thing itself. Ta'am is flavor. Ta'am is the flavor.
No relation to Toma.
No.
Oh,
Ta'am, tas ein mem, right? The ta'am, the flavor of it, is ki'ikar, like the substance itself, right? The flavor is like the thing itself. Says Reb Nosson as follows. He says, ki kol ikar habitul, the concept of nullifying something. What do you nullify? He says, hurak bishvil hatam, is to nullify the flavor. That's what you're trying to nullify. Kemuva b'poskim, like we have in the poskim in the halachic codes. That's the Torah. He says, kitam ki'ikar de'araisa, because on a biblical level, the flavor is exactly the same as the substance itself. So you pulled out the piece of pork, but the flavor that's left behind is like the pork. You need 60 times more kosher stuff to nullify that flavor. Says Reb Nosson as follows. This is a fundamental principle. He says, ki ikar hamachal, the most important part of the food is hu hatam hanirgash ba, is the flavor that you taste in it. That's what the food is. The food is the flavor of it. That's why people eat the foods that they eat, because of the flavor. That's why we eat the food that we enjoy. There's some foods that we enjoy and other foods that we don't enjoy, because we like some flavors and we don't like other flavors, which means that as far as we're concerned, the most important part of the food is the taste, the flavor, right? So even though the Torah says, what's asur? Pig. Pig is asur. But what's really asur about the pig is not like we discussed a couple of weeks ago, the bones of the pig. Because the bones don't have taste, they don't have flavor, they don't taste like it. It's nothing, right? It's the pig, the meat of the flesh of it. Why? Because that's where the flavor is. That's where the flavor of it is.
So related to that,
Yeah.
if someone were able to, and I know it's really not there yet technologically, break down the chemical composition of pig, chitlin essence or whatever it is, and then reconstruct that from non-pig sourced ingredients.
That's okay.
That you would have the exact, let's say you had the exact
That's okay.
flavor of pig. So it has to be source and taste.
Right. So it
But
might
source on its own is not enough, because pig sourced bones have no taste.
have no flavor, right?
So they have no essence of
This
pig.
is also why, by the way, tam pogum, if you would have pig that rotted,
Mhm.
right? So it doesn't taste good anymore. It loses the flavor, right? The flavor is now disgusting. It's repulsive. Now that repulsive flavor, even though it's the thing itself, that's not violating the prohibition of eating pig, because it's not pig anymore. It doesn't have flavor. It's not good, right? So says Reb Nosson, tam ki ikar de'oraisa, is because experientially food is flavor. That's how we relate to it. He says, va'al kein nikra b'shem ta'am. That's why it's called ta'am. Ta'am meaning flavor. But ta'am mamish loshen dibur k'moy shechaz v'avigal uvarach ta'amech. Tam is also what the Gemara refers to as reason and elocution. The ability to express an idea or to explain an idea is called the ta'am. The Gemara will ask very often. We'll quote a halacha, and then the Gemara will then say, my timer, what's the reason? Flavor and reason, because the reason that you eat something is the flavor. The flavor of something is the why of it. That's the why. That's the expression of it. Now, skip to Os Gimel on the next page. And there's a lot to see, but I'm skipping a little bit intentionally because we're going to get to some fascinating points. Yeah. He says, "Aval b'makom she'ein ta'am," where you don't have flavor. Kagon, for example, and we reviewed this halacha at the beginning of this evening. Kagon yavish b'yavish. For example, something dry. One piece of non-kosher meat with two pieces of kosher meat. They're not cooked together. You have 3 steaks. One of them is treif. 2 of them are kosher. Sitting on 3 separate plates, you cannot tell the difference. You have no idea the difference between them. Can you eat one of them?
What's the
Yes.
plate made out of?
What?
What's the plate made out of?
I don't know. Plastic, right?
I mean,
What if you had these three pieces of meat and you put them together in the same pot filled with water and turned it on?
No,
No, why not?
it's a mixture now.
What have you done now?
You've made it one thing.
You've mixed the
Essence, the flavors.
flavors. Now the flavors of these three things are all combined. And now you need to be mevatel the 60th against the flavor of it. But what if no flavors were mixed? You have three discrete items. Yovish b'yovish.
That majority principle.
Right. Rove, majority. So says Rav like this, why is it that when there's flavor that's mixed, you need 60? But when there's no flavor mixed, you just need a majority.
Because you're not guaranteed to be getting it.
So he says like this, take a look. He says, Kagon Yovish b'yovish and his battle Rove, all that you need is a majority. He says, Ki acharei rabim lahatos, because then you can just rule according to the majority. That's the Torah says, follow the majority rule. He says, Ksiv lahatos mamish, to lean in the direction of the majority. Ki yesh koach b'harov, there is the power of the majority, lahatos es ha'isur, to turn the thing that is forbidden, ulevatloy, and to nullify it, mamish, to make it null and void as if it's not usur anymore. This is no longer forbidden. It's not forbidden. Like Rabbi Nachman writes. And now he explains this in Kabbalah and in Chassidus. He says, Ki yesh koach ba'nefashos kshemiskashrin el nefesh echad lahachniya ulapila. He says, because the truth is that if you have a group of nefashos, of people, of souls, and you have one mixed into two, not mixed, that flavor, meaning one person versus two people. What'll happen to that one person's opinion?
Oh, this is like a Korach example. Like
It'll be swayed towards
Majority.
the majority, right? What happens when you have a small group of people, but they're discrete? Nothing's being mixed. What happens to the outlier? It trends into the majority, right? The outlier opinion ends up slowly folding in, right? That's what ends up happening. You have a group of friends. They all love a particular, band, but one of them doesn't really love it. What ends up happening to that kid?
FOMO.
They still go to the concert, right? They end up folding, but they end up following along. That's Achar Rabbi Nahata, says Rav Nassan, is not just a halacha, it's also a reality. That's what happens, right? You have one person that's an outlier amongst a group of people. That person ends up along the same lines as the rest of the crowd, right? Achar Rabbi Nahata is a reality. That's the way that the world operates. Everything ends up kind of trending towards an aggregate, and that aggregate is the majority. Majority rules. That's what ends up happening. This is Va'alken, and therefore he says, Kshaharov shel heter, when the majority of discrete items is heter, is kosher, is allowed. There is the power in those discrete kosher items to turn that which is not kosher, kosher. It makes it kosher. That thing that is not kosher loses its identity completely. It loses its identity. It no longer has the status of being not kosher.
So what you're saying is we should bring our boyfriends to shul one by one and grow our numbers.
Well, we'll talk about that in a minute.
I have to head out, Rabbi.
No, hold on. We get one more line. It says, "V'chola bitulim einam elak she'ein iser nikar." But that's only true if that which is asur is not recognizable as asur. It only works if you can't see that this is the thing that's asur. right?
If you know the steak's not kosher, it doesn't work.
Right. Then you can't be mevatel it because it maintains its identity as long as it is recognizable.
So circumcise your boyfriend first, then bring him.
All right, right? He says, "Aval nikra iser eloshim bittul." Something that is uniquely identifiable cannot be nullified. Ki bittul kol ha'isurim hu bittul mamish, because when you are mevatel the thing that's asur, it makes it nullified completely. Now, by the way, this works for Isser, and this works for people, and this works for Jews. How do Jews remain Jewish?
By maintaining a localized majority.
Separate.
Or
Separate.
That's what I mean, is a localized majority. We don't let ourselves be folded into the mass
So-
of the rest of people so we can be overruled.
but right, by maintaining a localized majority, but
Maintaining
also
our
by identity,
Yes.
right? If you are identifiable as a Jew, you are not batel. Right? There's no majority that can overcome an individual identity.
Right.
Because if it's recognizable, you can't nullify it.
If we wear baseball hats and polos around, then we're at risk.
Right, call our children, Chris to fit in,
Okay.
right? So
I
So-
read that names like Mortimer or Sydney were apparently like originally waspy names that German descended Jews in the US adopted to try and assimilate into like
sometimes,
New
yeah,
England,
sometimes
waspy culture. But then we did it so much that they became associated
with Jewish names,
Jews,
right?
because the wasps stopped using them. So then Mortimer just became like a Jewy name.
Right,
And I feel like Asians do the same thing when they name their kids like Agatha or Grace or like
Right.
Agnes. Yeah.
right. Those names become like,
they're assimilating weird. Like they're so aggressively going after it that now those are just names.
and now you have to name your grandchild like after the grandmother whose name was Agnes,
Yes.
right? And now like that name is
It's
like I have a friend
It's
whose
theirs
daughter's middle name is Genendel, right? Because that was like his grandmother's name. Like there's certain names, by the way, that like that didn't like carry over, like Zlotcha. Zlotcha was a very popular name once upon a time, right? You probably have relatives with the name Zlotcha. Zlotcha is like it's like it was like a beautiful Russian name, Zlotcha, right? It was beautiful, right? No, but not anymore. Like, good luck naming your kid that today. Then having friends.
The exact same as David Pardo's.
Ah, okay, good.
You do the exact
Good.
same.
Well, we're all friends.
Yeah.
Right. Says is the Hainu shemevalen is isa shehu haklipa at sheshav b'chinas heter. It says of Nassim as follows. This is very important to know. When Hashem created the world, He didn't create the world for everything to be forbidden. Meaning, everything in the world that's forbidden is temporarily forbidden. At some point in time, and there's a long discussion of the Arach Chaim, that Chazal tell us that one day the pig will be kosher, and that might mean that like we'll have synthesized pig flavor that like scientifically is now, but that pigs will become kosher means that Hashem created this for a purpose, and the purpose isn't exclusively don't eat it, right? Meaning this is what in Hasidus Kabbalah is called the klippa, the shell, the husk, before you get to the fruit, right? It's the thing that you have to like get through before you get to what you need. But in a very deep way, even that which is forbidden has the potential of being permissible. How?
Coming along.
If it's schlepped along, right? If it's nullified, if it's swallowed up, right?
The pigs will come along with the cows.
Right? Maybe, right? He says, "Aval kol zman she'ena ha'isur hanal over mimenu." But for as long as the thing is still forbidden, eino shum bittul, then you can't nullify it. It can't be nullified for as long as it has an idea. Look at me, I'm a pig. No, it's right. Look at me, I'm usher. No, you can't do that. He says, there are certain things in the world that are always forbidden no matter what. For example, something that like chametz on Pesach cannot be nullified. 1 crumb of chametz in 1,000 times more matzah, right, is still chametz. The whole thing is chametz. So what?
That's why I use the
Right.
square.
The only thing that you can do is to destroy it, or wait until
It's rotten.
after Pesach.
Oh.
Right? Wait until after Pesach. Meaning, chametz on Pesach is the epitome of evil. Right? You can't be mevatel that because it is
It is what
evil,
it is. It's-
right?
yeah.
it is recognized as that. It's that thing. You can't get rid of it. Right? You can't get rid of it. It's the ghost pepper. Right? The flavor of the identity of it is maintained forever. That's where it is. That is the epitome of evil. You can't get rid of it, and you can't eat it. Because the forbidden part is there forever. What you're trying to do is to get rid of this, not just the substance, but the identity of it. Now you ask a question. Well, so then let's do it. Let's take all of the isur and be mevatel it, right? But in every cholent, we should have less than a 60th of pork. Why can't we do that?
That's what I was wondering.
Right.
Does all of this imply to unintentional situations, or
So the halacha is
intentionally? For instance, the thing that keeps recurring is
Right.
come and
Right. So take a look. Take a look at, well, this is the last point that we're going to look at. We're going to look at Os Yud. Os Yud is on page 348 over here. 348. And we'll finish with this very beautiful idea here. On the left-hand side of page 348. Right? It says Va'al Kain, and therefore ein mevatlin isur lechatchila. You're not allowed to intentionally put. See you later. You can't put a piece of isur into your heter lechatchila. You can't do it ideally. Ideally, right? You can't say let's transform the isur into heter. Let's transform the forbidden thing into a permissible thing by putting in a piece of pork into this. Let's do it. Let's do it.
A little piece of pork that's under 60.
Right.
That's kosher.
Right? Let's make it kosher. Now, if it happened accidentally, then yeah, it becomes kosher. Right? You can't see it, right? You've gotten rid of it. It says, why not? He says, ki ikar bittul, nullification means, bittul isur, hu al yidei hastar sayidiyah, means through a hiding of that knowledge, of that identity. Dahainu al yidei sheyotza ha'isur va'over me'ene hadas v'nis'ariv. This thing that is forbidden left the realm of knowledge and being noticed. It slipped in. It got mixed in. It went from being, I know that this is not kosher, to I don't know what this is anymore. It left the world of knowing if this is permissible, forbidden.
natural transition.
It slipped in. It transformed. From being something that is evil. That is. I look at it. I see that I'm looking at it. I know that it's evil. It says targum. It turns into something almost translated. It's not the original thing. It's a translation. Which is accidental. Shena, which is the world of sleep. It happened to happen. Which is the world of doubt. If it accidentally slips away, that's called bittul. That's called, wow, it became nullified. Who knows what happened? Do you know what happened to that piece of pork? I don't know what happened to the pork. Nobody knows what happened to it. It just dissolved out of the world. Now that what happened to that item? It exists somewhere, yeah, but now it's kosher. It says, when you take something forbidden, you know this is forbidden. Chedata, ma'arva, and you knowingly, consensually mix it in. What have you done? That's not called nullifying it. That's called adding it in. Now you've added it in.
Giving it
giving it importance.
Yeah.
Now it has stature.
Yeah.
Look at me, I'm putting pig into my cholent. Right?
Could you say the same thing with the analogy of people?
Yes.
That to take a group of 3 Talmidim, Chachamim, and then mixing in one that's not such a good person and saying, I'm going to put him in with you guys and you guys make him better. Could you
Right.
say,
Doesn't
"Don't do
work."
that. Don't do that because
Yeah.
you're bringing him up and maybe the other 3 will
Right.
say,
In
oh,
that
he was
way.
put into our group. Let's look at him and see what he's doing.
Right.
In that way, don't do it.
Right.
Just
Do
say,
it in the way.
say, hey, why
of
don't you
the
just tag
bubble.
along?
If it happens naturally,
Right.
Yeah. Like
then it works. Right? Meaning,
Oh man, that's unbelievable.
right?
I just wanted to make sure the analogy goes both ways. That if you use people in one, yeah.
It says, you can see it. You see what exactly you're doing. You know what you're doing when you're mixing it in. You're not getting rid of the evil. What you're doing is you're adding it in. You see this all the time with people. You see this with people, like in general. You have like three like excellent students in a classroom, and they work really well together, right? You say, you know what? There's one kid that's like really messed up. We're gonna take you, Johnny, out from your group. We need groups of 3 here, and we're gonna put in, the guy that's like really messed up, and put him with the other 2 guys. Maybe there'll be a good influence on him. The likelihood is it's just gonna mess everything up, right? But if it happens to be that slowly but surely this guy becomes friends with those 2 other guys, naturally, well, now you've transformed that individual, right? Now, this is important in personal change as well. It means that if you want to become a better person, hang out with better people, right? Go and find good people and connect to them. Because then you'll be raised up by their aggregate. If you force yourself into a situation, that's not bittul. That's just bullying, right? You haven't done anything meaningful to change. All that you've done is you've just smushed a bunch of things together.
You need to be forced into a situation.
Or to force yourself, or to force other people
Well,
to
that's
adopt
essentially
you.
forcing yourself when you say, I'm going
Right.
to go hang out with better people. You're acknowledging that they're a certain crowd that you want to imitate. And so you're forcing yourself, but as opposed to your wife or someone saying, you should go hang out with them. And you're like, I don't really want to. And you're like, no, you should go. So that's
Right.
being forced into it.
Right. So if you're anytime that you're forced, it's not gonna work. Anytime that you're forced, it's not gonna work. You find people that are slightly better than you that you can have a good time with anyway, right? That in yeshiva, I tell my students all the time. I did this when I was in yeshiva. I found the guy that was better than me, and I kind of begged him to learn with me. I was like, I'll even if you like, you're faster than me, you're better than me, like that's okay. Like I'll tag along. Like I want to tag along a little bit, and that's okay, right? You can't do that to somebody that's like 500 steps above you, because then you have no idea, and then you're gonna end up messing up them and you. But the point that Rav Nassan is saying is mevaten is if you did it intentionally, then you weren't being mevatel it. Even if you've gotten rid of the flavor, you have strengthened its identity. You haven't weakened the identity. The identity is just as strong, maybe even more so. Now you're giving more acknowledgement to it, right? It's like.
So that's why the gelatin in gum and things like that is not kosher, because even though it has no flavor.
Right. So that's one of the reasons, right?
Forced it into,
You've put it in there, and you've said, I'm gonna put it in there. I'm gonna be mevatel it. That's one of the reasons that it's problematic. But this is we'll extrapolate this to, when you watch a show and there's like the token minority on the show, right?
I've never seen such.
Right. There's like the token minority, and it's like super obvious. Right? Look at how inclusive we are. We have like token minorities on our show. Right? That doesn't make you more inclusive. That makes you a racist. Right? So you can go, so clearly or South Park learned from Rav Nassim. But that's the point, right? When you have a token minority, so that's not being inclusive. You haven't mixed everything together. What you've done is you've made it very clear that this is not the same. That's what you've done. It makes you more of a racist. Makes you a worse person, right? The token Jew. We need to have a token Jew on the show. It's like Marvel had made it's inclusive of all the minorities, so they had to make one show about somebody that has Jewish background. I don't know. I didn't watch this one. Apparently,
it was ridiculous.
apparently it was really bad,
Yes.
right? That's
He's a Jew with the powers of Egyptian gods.
right. Shkoyach,
It's
Mazel
like
tov,
it's
right?
like a
Shkoyach,
black slave that summoned against the power of white people.
white supremacy, right?
Yeah.
That's dresses up with a hood over his head.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know. That's
That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm saying,
Moon Knight. That's what it is.
right. Okay. So Shkoyach, right? It was Shkoyach. Okay, Shkoyach. You made a show about a Jew. Now you guys say. No, what you did is you proved that the Jews aren't included, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no Marvel superhero that's specifically a white heterosexual male. Look at this superhero. We made him a white heterosexual male. No, right? Because that they're fighting against that being the idea of a standard. There's no standard. But once you try to be mavatal something by including it, that's not called bittul, right?
Mm.
That's what Rav Nassim saying
This
here,
also goes to the language again.
right?
I'm finding this bittul, the word, we use the word nullify, but that's not really,
Right.
it's not the whole thing.
It means the loss of
So much
identity
more
within it.
Indistinguished.
It means it's no longer that thing. Which is why he explains in a number of places. He explains throughout. This is why we have a halacha that a davar shebeminyan is not nisbatel. That if you have something, even if it's not uniquely identifiable, if it's part of a set, it's not going to be. There's no bittul. So something that's part of a set is not going to be batel, or a barrier, something that's a whole thing. Like even if you can't find the fly in the soup, but you know that a whole fly is in the soup, the whole soup is also, because a whole thing doesn't lose its identity. Or something that is particularly spicy, the flavor is going to persist even if it's unidentifiable, right? Or if the piece of meat that you're trying to be mevatel is what's called the chaticha ru'ulis kabed, it's a filet mignon. It's something that this piece of meat could be served by itself.
Could one argue that the spice that makes, let's say, the piece of meat that gets dropped into the chulin, let's go back to that. The piece of meat is treif. The spice is kosher.
Might be.
Ghost pepper is kosher.
Right.
Does the ghost pepper automatically attribute to the piece of meat that fell in? Or can you argue and say, well, the piece of meat is so small, but the ghost pepper is a kosher vegetable,
Right.
that am I tasting the meat, like the actual umami flavor?
Right.
Or am I tasting the pepper?
So
I put too much ghost pepper on this non-kosher piece of meat.
that's
Am I tasting ghost pepper or am I tasting the meat?
So that's an excellent question, and we'll talk about that, please God, next week or two. This is the question of chaticha nasa navela. Does the whole thing become? Do we assume that the entirety of the volume of the thing that is not kosher becomes not kosher? Meaning, if I put non-kosher something into my chicken soup, and then that chicken soup falls into a much bigger chicken soup, what am I nullifying? Am I nullifying the original piece of meat, or the thing that it has made not kosher? That question we will get to, but that's a little bit jumping from the from the world of halacha to 30,000 feet, understanding just a little bit of the Hasidus Kabbalah behind kashrus, and you see how many ramifications this has to the world of interpersonal relationships and Jewish identity, right? All of that is in the world of food and flavor, right?
It's amazing.
And that's how the tzaddikim learned halacha. Is this little bit of pig fat that's mixed into the soup, is this kosher? Is this not? What does this mean for raising my children in a non-Jewish society? Right? That's from here to there to everything. And Be'ez Hashem Chavra, we will continue next week.
All right, thank you.
Definitely say that.